I went from being a very lazy student to standing at the top of my promotion at university. And so far, this is the best technique that I've come across when it comes to learning and retaining information for long term. Here's the story. Back in high school, I was pretty lost, yet ambitious, just clueless about many things. And when it comes to studying, I had no idea on how to properly do that, apart from pulling brutal all-nighters whenever I needed to, which I think many of you relate to. After high school, I took a gap year where I decided to pursue a degree in computer science, and I promised my father I'd stand at the top of my class for the years to come at uni. I ended up topping my promotion and was honored by the minister. But here's the catch. I was a lazy student with zero knowledge on how to study and a goal I refused to miss. So I tried many things from rereading, note taking, summarizing, etc. But there was one thing in particular I used to do, especially whenever I had an exam that required me to remember a large amount of information. Basically, I used to take a pen and paper and try to see through my studying by writing everything from memory. Or sometimes I would just say everything out loud, like I was teaching it to myself. At the time, I had no idea I was using a scientifically proven learning method. But after reading a couple of studies, I realized something. Science has a name for this technique, actually, that's based on testing, which is active recall. And it's not just me. Research proves it's the ultimate learning method. Now, there are three key questions to be answered. One, why is testing so effective? Two, what type of testing works best? And three, how often should we test ourselves? I will answer each question with one of the experiments from the studies that I've read. And after that, I've distilled everything into a simple framework based on these studies and my own experience. So, stick around until the end because this is how you turn theory into A plus results. Why is this thing so effective? Well, the short answer would be because I've tried it myself, and from a personal experience, I can say that what I'm talking about works. However, there's one experiment that was done at Washington University where researchers split students into three groups. Let's call them group read, group light testing, and group test heavy. The first group, group read, studied a passage 4 times straight, the classical type of cramming. Group light testing studied 3 times the same passage, of course, and then took one test. And the final group, test heavy, studied just once and then took 3 brutal tests. No hints, no help, no nothing. And then all groups had 2 final tests. One took place 5 minutes later, and the other one took place 1 week later. The results showed that after 5 minutes, the rereading group performed better and they recalled more. But here's where it gets wild. After 1 week, the rereading group forgot nearly half of the information, whilst the light testing group performed better than them, with the test heavy group retaining significantly more and scoring better, even though they only studied once. This proves something game changing. Testing isn't just a measure of memory, it's a muscle builder for your brain. I know that most of you think of testing as a way of assessing yourselves, and this is probably due to the traditional schooling system. But I think you should start seeing them as a workout that makes your brain stronger. So you might be thinking, okay then, how do I test myself? Or what type of testing is most effective? Glad you've asked. Researchers actually wanted to find out which type of testing works best for remembering information, so they had students learn about a made up country and tested them in 3 different ways. Free recall, which is based on writing everything you remember with no hints, like I used to do. Cued recall, fill in the blank questions that give you some context. And recognition, multiple choice questions, just picking the right answer. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The researchers did 3 versions of this experiment. The only difference was the type of the final test that students took after 4 days. So, to recap, students studied a passage and then they were tested 2 days later, an intervening test, and then they had a final test 4 days later. And the final test actually was in version A, it was a free recall test. In version B, it was cued recall. And in version C, it was recognition, based on recognition. The results showed that the cued recall and recognition groups' performance was pretty close, with the free recall proving to be the most effective method in beating both of them in all three versions of the experiment. If there's one piece of information that I want you to take away from this video, it would be the harder your brain has to work to retrieve a piece of information, the longer it will retain it. Let me say this again. The harder your brain has to work to retrieve a piece of information, the longer it will retain it. So when you study, don't keep on rereading and summarizing and highlighting. Instead, test yourself at some points. But you might ask, how often should I do that? Here's the brutal truth. Space testing isn't just better. It's actually 200% more effective than cramming. In a 2011 study, students who spaced their tests retained twice as much compared to those who crammed. But how do you space it right? In one of the most comprehensive studies to address this question, subjects learned a set of facts, then they were tested at different intervals, and then they had a final test. The spacing between the learning and testing ranged from 0 to 105 days, depending on the final test's time. What they discovered was that, in general, planning a testing session about 10 to 20% of the way between the learning and the final test, or the when you need to remember it, is optimal. For example, if you have an exam in a month and you studied the material today, testing yourself after 3 to 6 days is optimal. Exam in 6 months, testing at week 2 and then month 1 is pretty optimal. And you've got two ways to do this. One, expanding scheduling, which is about testing at increasing intervals. As an example, you learn something and then you test yourself 1 day later, and then 3 days later you test yourself again. After 7 days, also you test yourself again, and so on. Two, fixed scheduling, which is about testing every X number of days. For instance, every 3 days or every week you test yourself. I would say go with expanding intervals for short-term goals and fixed ones for long-term mastery. The verdict: there's no significant difference according to science, and they both destroy cramming. So pick what works for you and start testing. Here's a simple framework that would help you. First, encode the right way. In this first step, you should be reading or studying the material thoroughly. Many people in this step take notes and fall victim to copying everything instead of actually studying and nailing down the essence of the material. So I would suggest take minimal notes and focus on understanding rather than copying. Also, you can ask yourself every now and then the simple question, what? Or what did I just read or study? For instance, every 1 or 2 pages, you close your eyes or look away and think to yourself, what did I just read? Trust me, this is a game changer, as it will force you to focus on the task at hand. 2. Free recall is king. Use it to see how far you can go early on. Do same day or next day testing. After finishing the studying or the initial encoding, try your best to test yourself within the same day if you can't do it in the next day. Why? Well, according to some resources, testing within 24 hours offsets forgetting by 50%. Free recall testing can take many forms. It's not about writing from memory. You can teach the material to one of your colleagues, to your puppy, to your cup of coffee, to yourself. It does not matter. Just teach it. If you think about it, before studying, this will prime your brain to focus more because it knows that it will have to recall the information later on. 3. Strengthen your weaknesses. By acknowledging what you don't know can't remember, or can't explain, you have a clear vision on what you should fix. This should save you from the focus on your strength is prevailing wisdom. Imagine you have to ace an exam which consists of 3 major parts. Say you nailed down the first 2. However, you suck at the third part, which represents your weakness. If you do not make a change and leave it as it is, you will not ace the exam. Period. Thus, targeting the weaknesses identified by the free recall is a very smart move. This is OP because focused reviewing saves time in contrast to passive rereading or studying. 4. Space out your testing. Including gaps between your testing sessions have been proven time and again to be superior to cramming. You tailor spacing between tests to your own needs and your end goals, of course. I already recommended scheduling at increasing intervals for short-term goals and fixed scheduling for long-term ones. However, you can even do a mix of both. First, use the expanding schedule. You can test after 1 day, and then 3 days, and then 1 week, and maybe 2 weeks. And then once you hit a certain point where the gap is large enough, just switch to a fixed schedule and make sure to revisit the information every 1 or 2 weeks, for instance. 5. Additional points. If you don't have enough time to do free recall, or if you just want to change things up, use flashcards or cute recall, for instance. You can also mimic free recall by providing an explanation with each answer. The important thing is you should be testing yourself. It's not about just doing free recall because sometimes you don't have time and sometimes you actually feel bored of doing free recall. There are many types of testing, but they are useful when you do them the right way. Flashcards can be useful if you do them the right way, and they can be a huge waste of time if you do them the wrong way. Another point, use AI tools to generate open-ended questions from PDFs or any other type of questions that you want. Actually, free recall is about answering open-ended questions, which will force you to remember as much details as possible and to bring the information to your brain in order to see if you actually remember it or not. If you try just one thing from this video, make it free recall. I hope you found this video useful. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. Share the video with someone that might need it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching and arrivederci.